This is a CNN special presentation.
After nearly 4 years, the people of Bosnia finally have a chance to turn from the horror of war to the promise of peace.
Today is the historic day for Bosnia.
There could be no winners. All are losers. Only peace is a victory.
I believe that the implementation of these agreements will result in lasting peace and create conditions necessary for the establishment of a new international order in this part of the world.
A nation born of war giving birth to peace. A peace that had to travel across the Atlantic to Dayton, Ohio. Then today, all the way to Paris. Now on the most important journey of all, home to Bosnia-Herzegovina. Throughout this hour, we will look at the hopes for that peace and the people who share it. Thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Woodruff at CNN Center in Atlanta.
And in Tuzla, I'm CNN's Christiane Amanpour. This war has not been ended by a decisive victory, but by exhaustion and by international pressure. And now the international community, America and her allies, are committed to making it work. In a few days, 60,000 US and other NATO troops will start rolling in to enforce this peace. Everybody here agrees that no US, no NATO. No NATO, no chance for peace whatsoever. And the stakes may be even higher than Bosnia. Leadership, collective security, and the values of a civilized society.
First, we go to Paris, where the hard-fought peace came to pass today, at least on paper. With the details, CNN World Affairs correspondent Ralph Begleiter. Ralph?
Judy, after nearly 4 years of war, the leaders of Serbia, Bosnia, and Croatia formally signed a detailed agreement for peace at an elaborate ceremony at the Élysée Palace here in Paris.
This time it was full signatures, not just initials, formally endorsing hundreds of pages of detailed promises to end the atrocities and bloodshed in Bosnia. The leaders of Bosnia, Croatia, and Serbia signed the accords they had earlier negotiated in Dayton. There are doubts everywhere, even among those who signed the deal.
There will be no revenge sought, there will be no vengeance sought, but justice has to obtain. Human rights have to be duly respected throughout. The guilty parties must be punished.
In Paris, President Clinton shook hands for the first time publicly with Slobodan Milosevic, the man widely charged with starting the war and fueling its nationalist flames of ethnic cleansing.
I therefore wish all the peoples in the former Yugoslavia a lasting and durable peace.
In this chorus for peace today, we also hear the hallowed voices of the victims. The children whose playgrounds were shelled into killing fields. The young girls brutalized by rape. The men shot down in mass graves. Those who starved in the camps. Those who died in battle. The millions taken from their homes and torn from their families.
Bosnian Serb leaders Radovan Karadzic and General Ratko Mladic did not travel to Paris.
They have been indicted by the War Crimes Tribunal, cannot be part of the political life of the country.
Croatian President Franjo Tuđman was urged by President Clinton to restrain his forces in eastern Slavonia, another of the remaining territorial disputes. The ceremony in Paris clears the way for the trickle of NATO troops in Bosnia to become a flood of 60,000 peacekeepers.
True peace remains to be built in hearts and in minds.
It's now up to all of us to turn ceasefire into peace, to turn peace into a lasting settlement.
Hello.
In their first act of cooperation, the leaders of Bosnia, Croatia, and Serbia jointly condemned attacks in Sarajevo, which occurred at the same time as the ceremony in Paris.
But all of the leaders left Paris amid a strong undercurrent of concern. So far, the Bosnia Accords are nothing more than promises. Judy?
Thank you, Ralph Begleiter in Paris, and we'll come back to you later in this hour. Christiane?
Judy, after 4 years of this war, the people of Bosnia are exhausted. As this peace treaty is signed, there is no celebration, just relief, in some cases fear, and in some cases bitterness. Perhaps many of Bosnia's cities have bled even to death, but perhaps more than any other, the capital Sarajevo has symbolized Bosnia's multi-ethnic complexion, and under the glare of the camera lights, they have had their suffering documented in microscopic detail. For 3 years, the people of Bosnia have asked, what took the world so long? CNN's Brent Sadler is there.
Thanks, Christiane. Well, for the war-hardened people of Sarajevo, it has always been a case of seeing is believing. And while the peacemaking formalities were successfully concluded in Paris, the sharp edge of reality made its presence felt here earlier today, with the familiar sounds of explosions and gunfire being heard in the city. One detonation tore a hole in the roof of an unoccupied building close to the demarcation line. No one was injured, but the United Nations suspects that a small mortar or a rocket-propelled grenade, one of a series of firing incidents, caused it. The Bosnian government claimed it was an attack by Serb terrorists. A short burst of anti-aircraft fire also hit the Holiday Inn Hotel. Again, there were no casualties, but the sporadic ceasefire violations were said by United Nations military spokesmen to have been caused by what were described as rogue elements, probably operating on the Serb side of the city. Earlier, a French helicopter was shot at by Bosnian government troops. It was hit several times, was forced to make an emergency landing, but the crew escaped unhurt. Well, the implementation of peace is going to be a sticky business in a country still raw with suspicion and emotion. Nevertheless, there remains a deep yearning for peace and unity in Bosnian government-controlled Sarajevo, as Mike Hanna now reports.
The remnants of Sarajevo's National Ballet. 5 dancers left out of what was before the war a company of 60. Some have fled, some are dead, and some, like soloist Masha Vatic, served as soldiers in the army.
I must defend my country, my theater, my town, my family.
Scarred by bullets and shrapnel, the theater still stands on the front line. And a ceasefire that the Dayton Accord aims at making permanent means the dancers can now pass the windows without the fear of sniper fire.
I hope the dancers will come back and we will continue to dance like we used to before the war.
Some in Serb-held Sarajevo see the accord not as security but as a threat. Neighborhoods like Gibraltar will come under the control of the predominantly Muslim Bosnian government in months to come. We will not live under Muslims, say the hardliners, and we will not leave Sarajevo.
They've been proclaiming that Muslims and Serbs are like cats and dogs who can't live together. When in fact they do live together, this is the best proof of how wrong, of how evil their ideology has been. And that's the thing they most fear, is that their ideology will be proven wrong by the integration of Sarajevo.
All too many have found the unity in death that they fought for in life. In Sarajevo's Cemetery of the Lion, Muslim, Croat, and Serb lie side by side. No racial division here. The monuments of a tragic past symbolize also the promise of a multi-ethnic future. Glittering too among the living, a sense of unity. Residents of all faiths, of all ages, gather in the city's opera house. The choir sings an old Croatian song about an innocent from another world who knows neither hate nor fear. But all around a city that reflects little else. The scars of nearly 4 years of war are open wounds that only time and peace may heal. And yet untouched by the shells is a sense of tolerance and civic pride, and still surviving the soaring hope that out of the Dayton Accords will emerge a lasting harmony. Mike Hanna, CNN, Sarajevo.
The weather, meanwhile, it's foggy here right now, is being blamed for delays in getting NATO troops on the ground. So far, only half of the 700-strong US enabling force has arrived in theatre, and there is a definite possibility that the transfer of authority from the United Nations to NATO may be delayed for at least 1 day. Christiane.
Branton, we're watching those developments here in Tuzla as well. As you know, this is where the US contingent is going to be based. Judy?
Thanks, Christiane. When we come back, ethnic cleansing, one of this war's dirtiest weapons.
This is Jack. He's learning about airplanes on a PC with an Intel Pentium processor inside. The Pentium processor has the power to make software look, sound, and feel more real, which lets Jack's imagination really take off. The Intel Pentium processor.
If you have what's overall the most powerful line of truck engines on the planet, if you have better resale value than Ford, Chevy, or GMC, if you have what it takes to get J.D. Power & Associates' most appealing pickup award, you're probably not going to put your trucks on sale. But then, if you're Dodge, you like to change the rules. Announcing the first ever Magnum Power Sales event with savings up to $670 and low lease rates on America's hottest pickups. At America's Truck Stop, the new Dodge.
My mom says a couple of ounces of antifreeze can kill our dog. Even 2 tablespoons can be bad for me. So we use an antifreeze that's safer for kids and pets. That's less harmful. My dad says any antifreeze can protect against freezing and rust. But is it less harmful for me? And JoJo? That's what my dad cares about. What about yours?
Sierra Antifreeze, because safer is better.
Your enterprise network is vital to the life of your business. Yet every day you ask it to carry more and more. Data, voice, and video. How much can your network endure before? Nortel designs Magellan networks to take on anything, including the future. No wonder there's an enterprise network from Nortel at the heart of so many leading global companies.
The human face, a landscape, difficult terrain where certain hairs grow taller, longer. Introducing a revolutionary 3-stage shaving system, Braun Flex Integral. The first foil removes short hairs. An integrated cutter shaves longer hairs. Then the second foil completes the job. New Flex Integral for Braun's closest shave yet. Braun, the world's most recognized shave.
Ethnic cleansing. It's an innocuous sounding term for perhaps the most horrifying result of this war. But there's a great irony. Despite all their hatred, these bitter enemies have the same ethnic roots. There are 3 principal groups of people in Bosnia-Herzegovina: the Muslims, the Serbs, and the Croats. All 3 are Slavic peoples. They speak the same language called Serbo-Croatian, though the Serbs use the Cyrillic alphabet, the same one used in Russian. And the Croats use the Latin alphabet, the the same one used in English and the Romance languages. Slavs first settled there more than 1,500 years ago. Over time, in general, Slavs who practiced Roman Catholicism became Croats. The Orthodox Christians became Serbs. And more than 500 years ago, when Turks took control of most of modern Bosnia, many became Muslims. Their religious and cultural differences laid the seeds for today's ethnic hatred. The Christians resented the Muslims because of Turkish oppression. After World War I, Croat resentment of Serbs skyrocketed because of what they saw as Serb domination. And Serbs still resent Croats for siding with the Nazis during World War II. And as witnessed during the past 4 years, Bosnia is one nation, diverse, but so mistrusting that killing has become a way of life.
And indeed, the campaign of terror that's been unleashed in Bosnia for the past 3.5 years has often been couched, as you say, in such innocuous terms. CNN's Richard Blystone now on ethnic cleansing, that terrible term that this war added to our vocabulary.
There is a river here, but it is not their river. There are hills, but not their hills. Houses, but not their houses. Life, but not... You have to live somewhere, but I don't think I'll ever love this place. Shahida Mulalic, her first name means war widow, is one of those refugees the Dayton Accord says can go home, but whose plight is none of NATO's business. Husband missing since midsummer, she and her 7 children share this room. In a village where, in a dismal kind of justice, Muslims who fled the Serb slaughter at Srebrenica in July are settling in the places of Bosnian Serbs who fled the Bosnian army this fall. It's hard to get people here to focus on the future because the past is so very much with them. Their brotherhood has branches all over the world, but is very exclusive. People who haven't experienced our betrayal and suffering can never understand, says Fadil Ahmetovic, who looks after 300 families with government handouts of flour, jam, oil, salt, and sugar. The international humanitarian aid agencies haven't been here. They could get electricity in exchange for labor, but almost all of them are women, children, and old people. There are a couple sources of pure water, a long walk from most houses. And the former owners are still feared. We're waiting every night for them to come back and cut our throats, says Shida Hrustic. We have no door to keep them out. Whether the peace pact will take them home or just legitimize ethnic cleansing is too academic for these people who hardly know something's afoot. Believe me, I know nothing at all about it, says Shahida Mulalic. Not going back till the Serbs have left Srebrenica, says her mother-in-law. Shida Hrustic says with both sons gone, she has nothing to go back with or to. Fadil Ahmetovic has read about the treaty, but no longer trusts it or anything. The longing may or may not go away, but most people here feel deep down that they'll never see Srebrenica again. Their only luck, that hopes not raised can't be smashed. Richard Blystone, CNN, Vozica, Bosnia.
And when we come back, UN peacekeepers were thrown into this war. Now NATO combat troops will try to enforce the peace.
And lessons learned from an unlikely place. Just how does South Central Los Angeles compare to Bosnia?
legendary watch dial, exhibited in distinguished museums around the world, is the design inspiration for the Movado Museum collection of watches. Movado, the museum watch.
We'll be in New York tonight. Changes? Okay.
Il veut faire des changements.
Okay.
OK. Add back the slides in the middle. Réintègre les pages PowerPoint à la présentation.
No problem, okay.
Move the forecast to section 2.
No problem.
Statistics.
We're on the internet.
Excuse me. We downloaded the new forecasts. We have the files right here.
Yes.
Yes, I've got it.
Business just fascinating.
Everything's in order. Okay? See you in New York.
Au revoir.
Here's a great big idea.
Salad shooter!
From Presto, professional salad shooter slicer shredder. Big capacity and power. Special blades to point and slice thick, slice thin, shred, even ripple cut. Right where you want it.
Salad shooter!
Presto.
Forget the way you've been brushing your teeth. And remember Interplaque, the power plaque remover with twisting bristles. Clinically proven to clean better than manual brushing and help prevent gum disease. Interplaque from Bausch & Lomb.
Entertainment Weekly calls Nixon the best movie of the year.
You have everything you've ever wanted. Why can't you just enjoy it?
Joel Siegel of Good Morning America says Nixon's the one. And so is Anthony Hopkins, one of the film's great performances.
A man doesn't cry. I don't cry. The fight.
Oliver Stone has made a great, shattering movie.
When do the rest of us stop paying off your debts?
This is Nixon's finish.
Nixon, rated R, starts December 20th.
The legendary watch dial, exhibited in distinguished museums around the world, is the design inspiration for the Movado Museum collection of watches. Movado, the museum watch.
Besides the obvious dangers of what may be snipers or isolated groups opposed to the peace process, NATO soldiers will also have to pick their way carefully over what's become Bosnia's treacherous terrain. Much of Bosnia's infrastructure has been badly damaged or destroyed during nearly 4 years of war. First, there are the bridges. Some are too weak to hold the weight of tanks, which make up part of the NATO arsenal. It's expected that many of the bridges will have to be repaired or rebuilt. And then there are the narrow roads, some hastily carved out of mountains and hillsides during the war, and most are barely wide enough for one truck to pass another. On top of that, the freezing cold. The bulk of the NATO peacekeeping troops will be arriving just as the infamous Balkan winter sets in. Part of the country is already under a foot of snow and more is expected. And beneath the snow lies a greater danger, mines. Several million of them are scattered throughout Bosnia, and NATO troops rely on all sides to tell them where they've placed the mines. The military mission ahead is potentially risky as NATO tries to forge a role for itself in the future Europe. CNN's military affairs Jamie McIntyre reports on NATO's hope for the future and for the short and long term.
The goal is not to fight a war, but enforce a peace, all while avoiding the quagmire of so-called nation building.
We are going in to implement a peace, a very different situation. The tasks which General Shalley will lay out for you, we believe are limited, clear, and achievable.
The plan for the biggest military operation in Europe since World War II is for 60,000 heavily armed NATO troops, led by British, French, and American divisions, to sweep into Bosnia overland from staging areas in Hungary and Croatia. Within 4 days, the NATO troops must take control of Bosnia and relieve weary UN peacekeepers who have weathered 3 years of fighting. By mid-January, the NATO forces are supposed to have marked the ceasefire lines mapped out by the Dayton Agreement and made sure the warring sides have withdrawn their forces and heavy weapons from 2.5-mile wide zones of separation.
The military mission is not to resettle the refugees or rebuild the country, but rather to create the conditions that will allow a multi-billion-dollar civilian reconstruction effort to succeed.
NATO is going to go in there and make sure that that peace agreement is implemented. I hope we can do most of that by persuasion. But if by chance that doesn't work, then we shall have to use more forceful means.
To do that, NATO has divided the country into sectors, each dominated by one of the major allies, plus one area controlled by NATO's Rapid Reaction Force. The British have the northwest, the U.S. the northeast. The French drew perhaps the toughest assignment, southern Bosnia, including Sarajevo, where reunification of the capital could provide the decisive test of whether the land swaps promised in the peace agreement can survive the reality check of enforcement. The U.S. has a potential flashpoint in its sector as well, the Posavina Corridor, a narrow strip of land that connects Serb territory in the east and west. The Serbs control it, but the Bosnian government also needs it for vital access to the Sava River. It's an issue unresolved by the peace plan.
I suppose the biggest risk, looking back at the last 3.5, 4 terrible years there, is inevitably, from my point of view, not pessimistically, the uncertainty about how will this stick at the political level.
But the immediate headache for the NATO force will be patrolling the hundreds of miles of rugged terrain along the DMZs, demilitarized zones 4 kilometers wide that will separate the avowed enemies. NATO troops will employ every trick and tactic to monitor and intimidate the factions, from experimental airborne surveillance systems to sophisticated anti-sniper weapons. In Somalia, the U.S. relearned the folly of pinning a policy on the capture of a single person. The failed manhunt for Somali faction leader Mohammed Farah Aidid cost 18 American lives and ultimately sank the mission.
It's inconceivable to me, after what happened in Somalia, that we would have a repetition of that.
So NATO insists it will arrest indicted war criminals Radovan Karadzic and Ratko Mladic only if its forces happen upon them. Burned in Haiti by the embarrassing image of U.S. troops standing by while a civilian was beaten, American commanders insisted NATO troops have authority to stop human rights abuse when they see it. NATO troops are allowed to shoot first, ask questions later, but the success of the NATO mission rests on 2 big unknowns: the peaceful intent of the combatants and the pace of civilian reconstruction.
There are certain military tasks to be fulfilled, but the military cannot establish the long-term conditions for peace and stability in that area.
Rebuilding Bosnia will take billions of dollars and years of work, but the NATO nations are committed to stay for only 1 year. As one NATO minister put it, we're going in with the Americans and out with the Americans. Jamie McIntyre, CNN, the Pentagon.
The signing of the peace agreement a few hours ago was really just the beginning of the long road toward true peace. And the Dayton Accord is the roadmap everyone is expected to follow. One way to look at the journey ahead for Bosnia is to look at the route others have taken. One such example can be found here in the United States, where a violent crisis erupted at the same time as the Bosnian War, the Los Angeles riots. What does this war have in common with this riot? In both cases, an external military force was needed to end the chaos.
You have a clear mission, and you have a specific set of tasks that you're going to perform in order to reach your end state or your exit strategy. We had that in Los Angeles, and the ultimate objective was to create a safe and secure environment and a peaceful environment where commerce could return. And that's essentially what the military is going to do in Bosnia: create a safe and secure environment, freedom of movement, where the nation-building apparatus can begin.
CNN analyst General Marvin Covalt was in charge of the troops deployed to calm Los Angeles when rioting and looting broke out. He sees a number of parallels with Bosnia. Both areas are small, ethnically diverse enclaves within a larger community. Both had long-standing ethnic tensions and problems that erupted into a crisis in the spring of 1992. And in both cases, the larger task is not stopping the fighting, but rebuilding the community afterwards.
What remains to be seen then is the comparison with Los Angeles. Is a civilian nation-building force going to get there in time to begin to change the environment in Bosnia so that a year from now, when the military departs, that they will not fall back to, quote, normal situations where they'll be fighting with each other?
In Los Angeles, the military departed within weeks. Promises of aid flowed in. and the group Rebuild LA was born. The effort has concentrated recently on redeveloping vacant lots, and especially on bringing in services such as grocery stores. But much of the money promised never made it to the streets, and many social problems remain.
The subsequent rebuilding effort has been really mixed. There have been some measured successes, but I think overall it's been a failure. For example, unemployment is still very, very high within the African American community. Obviously, we have the problem of drugs, we have the problem of gangs, we have the problem of welfare crisis and poverty in the community, we have the problems of homelessness. All of these issues were the things that sparked and fueled the civil disturbances within the city. But all of these issues still have not been resolved.
In the case of Bosnia, the rebuilding effort is just getting organized. Sweden's Carl Bildt has been appointed as High Representative to coordinate the complex international effort. He is just putting together a structure and staff, and the billions of dollars needed have not been found. The head of Rebuild LA says one of the biggest hurdles she faces is changing the perception that South Central Los Angeles is a troubled, violent place.
Right now, Bosnia will have that problem. The perception of here's a place that can get along. And they'll just need to dispel that and get beyond that and really show, community unity.
Such unity seems far off for Bosnia. But without a concerted effort to rebuild the nation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, the international military effort may make little difference. Christiane?
And when we come back, crimes against Muslims, against Croats, against Serbs, crimes against humanity.
Who will join the most influential people of our century? CNN presents Time Man of the Year, Sunday, 9 Eastern.
You could run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and still not get as fit as you'd become by working out a few minutes a week on the Soloflex muscle machine. That's because the Soloflex gives you all the benefits of free weights, safely. And with just a few workouts a week, you can add strength, energy, and literally years to your life. Call now for a free brochure and video. And get on the road to real fitness.
Inside Politics, 4 and 8:30 Eastern on CNN.
Did you ever notice how many times a day you look at your watch? More women rely on a watch made by Citizen than any other timepiece, because more women prefer a watch made by Citizen than any other timepiece on Earth. Citizen, how the world tells time.
The Scottish poet Robert Burns once wrote that man's inhumanity to man makes countless thousands mourn. Sobering words that barely describe the horrors documented 50 years ago in Nuremberg, site of the first war crimes trials to be held before an international court. World War II had ended just 6 months earlier. Germany, the country that had brought on the war, lay in ruins. The Allies, the victors, hoped the Nuremberg trials would deter future generations from repeating such brutalities, described by one tribunal as a horrible deviation on the road of civilization. But in the following 50 years, more than 20 million people have perished in wars, other conflicts, and crimes against humanity. In the 1970s, more than 1 million people were methodically exterminated in Pol Pot's Cambodia. In the 1990s, as many as 1 million were slaughtered when extremist Hutus went on a genocidal binge against Tutsis in Rwanda's civil war. And in the Balkans, how many people have been killed, how many women have been raped, and how many people have been thrown out of their homes in brutality unmatched in Europe in 50 years. CNN's Jim Clancy reports that prosecuting those responsible, those accused of war crimes, will be a daunting task.
They have been driven from their homes by the hundreds of thousands. They have been executed, burned, raped, and beaten. The evidence of war crimes committed by all sides against Bosnia's civilians is overwhelming. Survivors like this man say they saw who did the killing and stand ready to testify. The International War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague is also ready. It has issued more than 50 indictments and continues to investigate other cases. But thus far, only one man is in custody awaiting trial. As NATO forces begin deploying in Bosnia, the risks of a drive to find and arrest those accused are obvious. Bosnian Serb leader Radovan Karadzic and his military commander, General Ratko Mladic, reject the authority of the tribunal and bluntly warn attempts to arrest them for genocide and war crimes will create a nightmare for NATO.
What I can tell is that if you give me good evidence about my crime, I would arrest myself. Nobody should do it. We would arrest any Serb that have evidence about atrocities. Nobody else should try to arrest people throughout Bosnia, because in that case there would be terrible incidents.
With top-ranking Bosnian Serbs and Bosnian Croats already indicted by the court, the predominantly Muslim government is emphatic about its support for the tribunal.
You get the feeling that some people are scared of justice, and not just Karadzic and Mladic. We think, in fact, justice is the main way we're going to achieve peace, reconciliation in our country.
But villages have been burned and civilians killed in Bosnian government military operations as well. Their side may be the last of the three warring factions to be indicted, but prosecutors say the evidence is there.
Well, I don't want to put a time on it, but that investigation is going well, and certainly indictments can be expected in the not-too-distant future.
NATO will not act as a police force, hunting down suspected war criminals. But in Bosnia, the international community is also accused, charged with standing on the sidelines for far too long. With the evidence already in hand and its forces on the ground, NATO can ill afford renewed charges of looking the other way. Despite the perceived risks, the War Crimes Tribunal shows no signs of backing down. It has already issued warnings to all of the factions involved, as well as the governments of Croatia and Yugoslavia, that under the terms of the peace deal, they must hand over suspects and cooperate fully with investigations. If that cooperation isn't forthcoming, the United Nations Security Council may be forced to take a vote to impose sanctions. Jim Clancy, CNN in Northeast Bosnia.
The world looks the other way when our special continues.
Enterprise network is vital to the life of your business. Yet every day you ask it to carry more and more. Data, voice, and video. How much can your network endure before? Nortel designs Magellan networks to take on anything, including the future. No wonder there's an enterprise network from Nortel at the heart of so many leading global companies.
Mom, you're the best.
Well, what brought that on?
Well, we couldn't have redone this house without you. And with your arthritis and all.
Jim, my arthritis pain is under control.
Evidently. Did you find a cure?
No, but I did find Arthritis Foundation pain relievers.
You mean like the Arthritis Foundation?
Exactly. There are 4 different kinds, and they're all terrific.
And part of the purchase price goes to research to find a cure.
So maybe you won't have to worry.
Mom, you are the best.
Arthritis Foundation pain relievers for relief you can count on until we find a cure.
Let's look at the Magnum Power Sales event one word at a time. Magnum, as in Magnum engines, as in Dodge Ram, ranked most appealing pickup by J.D. Power & Associates. Power, overall the most powerful line of truck engines on the planet. Sales, save on 5.2 and 5.9-liter V8s, up to $670, or $500 on Cummins diesel. And event, it's the first time America's hottest pickups have ever been on sale like this. At America's Truck Stop, the new Dodge.
Oh, snowman!
Oh, now we can make our own! Oh, this is cool!
Ah, my own mutual fund. Presenting the gift of shares, a mutual fund gift from Alliance Capital. For just $250, you can start anyone you love investing this holiday season. The gift of shares, another way Alliance Capital gives you mutual funds without the mystery.
How does one go about starting a business in their home?
Get a house. Big one. I mean, big enough, you know. Yeah, it doesn't have to be real big.
Sometimes life calls for deeper answers. That's why there's CompuServe. No online service has more informed user groups, more comprehensive databases, and better access to the internet. Enter CompuServe. Call for free software and 10 free hours online.
Now a look at the individuals who helped create this piece of history. With the exception of natural disasters, the events that have changed the world have all been the result of those who, for better or worse, took matters into their own hands. There are a few such men who brought Bosnia to the place it is today. Slobodan Milosevic is president of Serbia, Bosnia's neighbor to the east. Milosevic is a former communist leader who supported fellow Serbs inside Bosnia in the fight against Muslims. Milosevic's main ally within Bosnia is Radovan Karadzic, leader of the Bosnian Serbs. A psychiatrist and the author of books of poetry and children's stories, Karadzic stands indicted for war crimes by a United Nations tribunal. Also under indictment, Bosnian Serb military leader General Ratko Mladic. Their main enemy in Bosnia is Alija Izetbegovic, the president of Bosnia-Herzegovina. A Muslim, a lawyer, Izetbegovic was once jailed for allegedly plotting to overthrow communism. To the north of Bosnia, Croatia's president Franjo Tudjman, a longtime supporter of Croatian nationalism. Tudjman wanted unity with Bosnia's Croats, but now says he supports Bosnian sovereignty. An American played a major role in bringing these men together, Assistant Secretary of State Richard Holbrooke. And in forcing the peace, an American, Supreme Allied Commander General George Julwan. And the NATO commander for Southern Europe is U.S. Admiral Leighton Smith. The civilian equivalent to the military leaders is European Union negotiator Carl Bildt. The Dayton Accord calls for his title to be High Representative, to oversee reconstruction in Bosnia. The story of these men has been as much about diplomacy as it has been about war, something true for this crisis overall. CNN World Affairs correspondent Ralph Begleiter joins us again from Paris with diplomacy's sad tale of fits and starts. Ralph.
Judy, almost everyone imagined that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the victorious democracies of the West would take on new political power. So when demagogic leaders in Belgrade and in the Serb sections of Bosnia fanned the flames of ethnic nationalism, many people assumed the West would put a quick stop to the violence.
The breakup of Yugoslavia had revealed Serb intentions to assert control over Serb territory. Already, Serbs had seized 1/3 of Croatia. But European leaders thought they were promoting democracy and stabilizing the Balkans by quickly moving to recognize Slovenia's, Croatia's, and Bosnia's independence from Belgrade. Granting United Nations seats would surely create a fait accompli Belgrade would respect. But the tactics didn't work. The Serbs, Croats, and Muslims ignored the international community. The Serbs of Bosnia, determined to build a greater Serbia by federating with Belgrade, escalated their campaign of attacks and atrocities reminiscent of World War II. It was all happening just as the United States was preoccupied in election year politics. Europe was on its own. While Britain, France, and other allies poured peacekeepers into Bosnia, the atrocities continued, even intensified. International mediators drafted peace plans, plans ignored by the Serbs.
It is a situation where Europe has performed, I think, in an abysmal way.
Belgrade offered ammunition, fuel, and other supplies to maintain the Bosnian Serbs' overwhelming superiority over the Bosnian government. The new U.S. administration dispatched a new Secretary of State to ask Europe if it would agree to a combined plan of lifting the arms embargo from the Muslims and striking at the Serbs from the air. Europe rejected lift and strike. France and Russia especially objected to any plan that could endanger the peacekeepers by undermining their neutrality. Russian peacekeepers proudly displayed their historical affinity for the Serbs. Without an Allied consensus, the Europeans tossed Bosnia into the hands of the United Nations. The West soothed its conscience about the horrible war in the heart of Europe by providing an extraordinary humanitarian aid effort for the Muslims.
I've always thought, however, that humanitarian aid, as important as it may be, is not enough, and that only a political settlement will really solve these issues.
The humanitarian aid, however, was subject to Serb cooperation. Checkpoints, airports, roads, even Sarajevo airport were effectively under Serb control. The West did shut down Serb air combat with a no-fly zone over Bosnia and launched a campaign of leaky economic sanctions against the Serbs. A war crimes tribunal was established, but with little prospects of actually bringing war criminals to justice. The Allies warned the Serbs to withdraw their heavy weapons from around Sarajevo and established so-called safe havens for the Muslims, supposedly guaranteed by the United Nations. In the spring of 1995, the West tried to pressure the Serbs with pinprick airstrikes. Angry Bosnian Serb leaders reacted by ordering their troops to take United Nations peacekeepers hostage, the ultimate embarrassment for the ineffectual international diplomats. Meanwhile, the safe havens were becoming a farce. The Serbs brazenly overran 2 of them. A third, Sarajevo, was constantly under fire. Now, the West tossed aside the indecisive United Nations command, and NATO launched a more aggressive air campaign against the Serbs. The West encouraged a newly strengthened Croatian army, making gains in western Bosnia. Suddenly, thousands of Serbs became refugees. Convinced at last there would be no peace in Europe without American intervention, President Clinton challenged a top U.S. diplomat to take advantage of the military turn of events in Bosnia to launch a major negotiating push.
We feel a great obligation to all of our allies who are in UNPROFOR, who are in vulnerable positions.
The American official, Richard Holbrooke, met privately with Serb President Slobodan Milosevic and with the 2 Bosnian Serb leaders who had been branded war criminals by the International Tribunal. The outlines of a peace deal became apparent. Milosevic concluded it was time to pull the plug on the Bosnian Serbs. He agreed to an unprecedented face-to-face peace conference, not in Europe, but in the United States. The U.S. leaned hard on its Bosnia friends, the Muslims, to accept the division of Bosnia, allowing establishment of a separate Republika Srpska. Milosevic bargained away some of the Serbs' dearest gains. In the end, the deal looked a lot like the one the Europeans had tried to get years ago.
Another round of diplomacy has produced the Bosnia Accords, signed here in Paris, and it's now up to NATO and the goodwill of Bosnia's leaders to make the agreements real. Judy?
All right, Ralph Begleiter in Paris. Thanks. Christiane?
Judy, Bosnia-Herzegovina, how did it get to this point, and where will its future take it?
shouldn't have.
Well, what do you mean?
You don't even know my size.
I guessed about 2 carats.
Oh.
Neiman Marcus Unwrapped.
This is Jack. He's learning about airplanes on a PC with an Intel Pentium processor inside. The Pentium processor has the power to make software look, sound, and feel more real, which lets Jack's imagination really take off. The Intel Pentium processor.
See this? It's your ATM card. It's got your name, got your bank's name, but what if it had a MasterCard logo too? Then it'd be a MasterCard Master Money card. An ATM card so useful, it would also work like a check. So you could shop for stuff all over the planet, at 12 million places where you see this. And the money comes out of your checking account, so you don't have to carry all that cash. So you see, Master Money is still your ATM card, only better. Neat trick, huh?
Life is fun. You've got the pictures to prove it. With the Pentax IQ Zoom 140.
In our previous report from Ralph Begleiter, you had a view of Bosnia seen from the outside. Sometimes it's different when you're looking from the inside. Now, the international community has put all its prestige and credibility into making this peace work. Many here in Bosnia wonder what might have been had the world reacted earlier. In the end, the big powers just needed peace in Bosnia, and they hoped that justice would follow. The world began by treating Bosnia as a humanitarian disaster and was quickly crippled by what turned out to be Europe's longest, most vicious conflict, with war crimes unparalleled since World War II. For 3.5 years, the diplomatic and military might of the international community was held hostage by a relatively small Bosnian Serb force.
Bosnia presented a view of the world of the chaos and anarchy that may ensue if the international community is not able to pull itself together and chart a new course and form a new basic reference. And it's now quite clear that the international community understands now that if we want peace and order in this world, we must invest in it. We must be ready to use force to do it. And that has always been true.
But in this war, UN peacekeepers were thrown in, where there was no peace to keep.
I think when we have civil wars and we see those pictures on television in front of our newspapers, sometimes governments have to act or face public relations uproar. When that happens, we are sometimes have to go into situations which are less than ideal.
The UN mission was purely humanitarian, get food to people under siege and under fire. Bosnians joked that they were being fattened for the slaughter. Because the shelling never stopped, women and children, civilians were targeted by snipers. Ethnic cleansing carried on relentlessly. People were the point of this war, moving them, that is. Bosnia's Serbs were determined to carve out their own separate, ethnically pure state. Trying to contain the war, a divided international community made policy often based on TV pictures of high-profile carnage. In February 1994, a single shell that killed 68 people and wounded about 200 prompted the first robust action. NATO created an exclusion zone around Sarajevo and forced the Serbs to back off or face bombing. In May 1995, Bosnian Serbs took UN peacekeepers hostage and publicly humiliated them. Many of these soldiers were French, and it enraged their new president, Jacques Chirac, who vowed tougher action on Bosnia. But 2 months later, the so-called UN-safe areas of Srebrenica and Žepa fell to the Serbs. A slaughter of thousands of unarmed Muslims followed. Human rights officials called it the largest massacre in Europe since World War II. By this time, Serbs had virtually cleansed all of eastern Bosnia of all its Muslims. Neighboring Croatia cleansed its occupied territories of all the rebel Serbs and created a huge exodus into Serb-held areas of Bosnia. But an ethnic balance was being struck between Serbia and Croatia, with Bosnia's Muslims stuck in the middle. Then NATO got the excuse it was looking for to end the Serb reign of terror in Bosnia. A shell landed in a Sarajevo market, 37 people were killed and dozens more were wounded. The UN blamed the Serbs, and within 48 hours, NATO began the biggest bombing campaign in its history. By the end of September, Bosnia's Serbs faced NATO, battlefield losses, and were abandoned by their patron, the President of Serbia. The Bosnian government faced facts. It had won about as much land as it could on its own. An intensive US-led diplomatic drive hammered out a peace, and now a US-led NATO coalition plans to enforce it. The American peace plan calls for Bosnia to remain a unified state, but many fear that unless it is rigorously implemented, it might lead to permanent ethnic partition. For the past 3.5 years, two ideologies have clashed in Bosnia. One, a separatist, secessionist, and even racist. The other, to maintain a unified, multi-ethnic society. Both sides reached their goal halfway. Nobody really won, and everybody really lost. The American peace plan is meant to build a better Bosnia than before, but even its chief architect, Richard Holbrooke, admits that this is a deliberately ambitious plan, one that might never be fully implemented. The goal here is not perfection, but peace. And whatever the future brings for Bosnia, in the words of French President Jacques Chirac today, this rampage of horror will leave a deep wound in the heart of Europe. Good evening, Judy.
Good evening, or we should say good morning, Christiane. And I think there's been so much killing and so much hatred, the whole war still has an air of unreality about it. Perhaps many will take note of something President Clinton said today. He said he was uncomfortable shaking the hand of Serb leader Slobodan Milosevic, but he remembered the words of Israel's late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, quote, "You don't make peace with your friends." Thanks for joining us.
This is a CNN special presentation.